We're ready?
Thanks for bearing with us here. Trying to work through some technical issues. Good. All right. I'll call to order the meeting of the City of Albany Traffic and Safety Commission for May 22nd, 2014. We'll start with the roll call, please.
Harry Chomsky,
Here.
Peggy McQuaid,
Here.
Susan Reeves,
Here.
Ken McCroskey is going to be arriving late. Farid Jabandal.
Present. Okay. Our next item is approval of the minutes for April 24th, 2014. Those are going to be included in the June agenda.
June.
So
That's right.
we're not going to do that tonight. We're going to wait till June. We'll have them published and ready for everyone to review then. Which takes us to public comment, the opportunity for anyone to speak to an item not on tonight's agenda.
You want to make a line of people who want to speak during public comment? Please fill out a comment card. It's right there.
Good
And
morning.
if you can give that very much.
Maureen Crowley, 600 Block Canes. I haven't prepared an actual speech, so I hope you comprehend what I'm talking about. We live on the 600 block of Canes. What I'm complaining about impacts the 5, 6, 7, 8, and 900 blocks of Canes. What is happening since the integrated corridor mobility thing is, 6 o'clock in the morning with no television on, we immediately know if there's a problem on the freeway. Because the freeway gets so congested, they are flushed to San Pablo Avenue. San Pablo Avenue becomes beyond congested, and all these cars come tearing down onto Canes, making left-hand turns through San Pablo, and they go zoom, 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 at least once every 10 seconds. This Monday, they were going on for like 3.5 hours, non-stop. And we're really fed up with it. As I said on Monday, I said, when is the next traffic and safety meeting? Something has to be done about it. It's really ridiculous, and I would like to see some kind of obstacles. I realize it has to be future agendized, and I realize in the future sometime soon we talk about the bicycles. It endangers people living there. It's beyond a nuisance. They don't adhere to any rules. They don't respect our community because they don't live there. And it's a constant flow of traffic every time there's a problem on the freeway. And it's getting more and more ridiculous. And I don't believe it's just impacting Canes. I'm sure Kearney and equivalent streets are also having probably the same problem. And somebody needs to figure something out. I think the very least we can do is like, you go down there if you're, what they call that local neighborhood direction, whatever you want to call it. Speed bumps, when the bicycles come, you talk about those big concrete circle things. Whatever you can possibly do to help, we really appreciate it because it's getting worse and worse and worse. And I can't think what else to say. I had a lot to say, but I can't think what it is right now I want to say. It just leaves you speechless. And I think for the amount of money spent on all their research, they could have figured out that maybe when you congest up St. Pablo Avenue, it's going to impact people in the neighborhood. And obviously they've made no, as I can see, any idea whatsoever, to help lessen the impact for people living in the neighborhood. We have kids going to school at time in the morning, the regular neighborhood's going to school, going to work, my pets. We're just really fed up with it, and I really appreciate when you, pretty soon you put this on the agenda and let us know what we can do to also help in some way. Measuring the speed doesn't necessarily work because unless the freeway is congested, the speeds vary tremendously depending on what's going on the freeway. But it's definitely it happens definitely more than once or twice a week now. And we're just fed up with it, totally fed up. That's it.
If I could ask a question.
Yeah.
How is the IDICM pushing traffic onto San Pablo?
Well, what happened, it's been less than a year, but it's definitely, sometime last year we started noticing this. They've got some signs on I-80 westbound in the mornings now. Mm-hmm. So when that gets too congested, they would do called flushing. And they direct the traffic, when it slows down too much, onto San Pablo Avenue. And when it goes on San Pablo Avenue, that gets gridlocked, completely gridlocked. and then people just cut through where they can. And Canes being one way, just parallel to San Pablo, is a great place to just tear down there from our...
No, I understand that. I was trying to figure out how the flushing, which is supposed to work to get traffic back to the freeway, was pushing them to San Pablo.
Because they are not telling the whole story, or maybe they never thought this through. I have read it. I read the article in detail today. And, there's like a brochure that goes with it. And the flushing kind of implies returning to the freeway.
Right.
But the flushing doesn't really discuss the fact before you get back on the freeway, obviously you would have had to go off the freeway. And that's where the problems occur in between getting off that freeway and get back on.
Right, and the article's implying that they've turned that system on?
They're very vague.
Okay.
It'll be complete.
The construction's not complete yet, so...
Yeah,
It's going to be
puzzled.
finalized, they say, in 2014. But the way things are going, whatever they do is not going to benefit people on Canes or Kearney or any other kind of street parallel to St. Pablo Avenue. It's a real mess.
Okay, I just wanted to get a sense of what it is that we need to investigate, because until the gantries are up on the freeway, the
I
system's
think they
not
are up.
active.
They have something called...
No, they're still setting the posts in
Yeah.
place to set up the gantries. You'll see big gantries across the top of the freeway westbound.
There's some other word they use for it. I wrote
Sure.
trailblazer signs.
Right,
Yeah, but they're not active
on.
yet. I think it's going to be in
Well,
about 2 years.
people
Right.
appear to be... I don't know, their
we'll
initial...
investigate based on what you've told us. At
Okay.
this point, nothing from the system should be turned on. If it is, we need to know about it. If we need to have a meeting about it, we'll agendize that.
Well, people are clearly leaving the freeways and hopping down San Pablo and making that worse than usual, which is
Right.
always bad.
But if
And then-
individual drivers are making that choice, there's nothing we can
But
do.
if it's 1 every 10 seconds, that's a lot.
Okay.
It is.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So it will be agendized later on?
We will investigate if there's anything to agendize.
So,
If it's drivers just dealing with congestion, that's a different story than the IADICM. A project that isn't scheduled to be turned on for 2 years should not be having an impact now. So we need to find out what is actually causing it. If
Right.
it's something that's a program that we can address, we'll agendize it.
One thing I've noticed is that the freeway in San Pablo Avenue these past 2 weeks have been really, really congested. And I don't know why, because there have not been accidents. So
Right.
it's maybe, I don't know.
but I think as representative whatever's of our city, that
Okay,
you
I
you
just
have
had a
you have an
follow-up question. I think
obligation.
we're good.
You have an obligation to, if our neighbour was having a problem, I think you should have an obligation to try and solve it.
Understood. We need to know what the problem is we're trying to solve. We're on to the next person,
Problem is
please.
the
Thank you,
mess.
Maureen. Next speaker, please.
Hi, Amy Smolens, Albany Strollers and Rollers. Just want to let you know, last week, Lynn Eve Komaromi, who's an ASNR member and a bike commuter who lives on Pierce Street, wrote a note to Aleda Andrino Chavez talking about the problems at southbound Pierce Street, that the light was turning green and there was no pedestrian or cyclist leading pedestrian interval, and that was causing dangerous conditions that people were zooming and making a right turn, and especially if the person was a student, it was pretty dangerous. So Aleda replied that she would go talk to the technician and work on it, and within a week that was done, and now there's a leading pedestrian and cyclist interval on that crosswalk, so I'd appreciate that. It's much safer. And then a couple days after that, I rode my bike to Target and saw that really ridiculous bicyclist dismount sign on the bike trail, and that I've seen 1,000 times. And so I decided, I'm going to drop a line to Ray Chan, who's pretty new, and he's the new Public Works Director, and he may not know about it. So I mentioned it and sent a picture, and a couple days later, it was gone. He got rid of it. So thanks to city staff for doing that really quickly and without red tape and just doing the logical and safe thing. Thanks.
Thank you. Speaker, please.
Can I just address one point? There actually is a bicyclist dismount sign that's still up in that area, and Aleda has promised me that it will be removed in the near future.
Hi, good evening. I'm Eleanor Moses, and I'm a North Albany resident. And I'm here tonight to express my concerns about the Creekside project that's scheduled to start.
I'm sorry.
Okay. at the El Cerrito Plaza. I'm guessing in about 6 weeks. That's what the developer says, and their permit is pending. And in my conversations with the city of El Cerrito, my understanding is that they plan to update their traffic circulation plan, and they're working with a consultant on that. But we haven't really been able to get, I have some friends here from North Albany as well, North Albany Neighborhood Association, and we've reached out to the developer as well as the planning department in El Cerrito, but haven't really been able to get a sense of what it is that they're doing and what the plan will be. They have an old traffic and circulation plan from 2010 that they say is obsolete at this point, so we're not quite clear. And there's some other concerns that we have in terms of what the projected traffic will be. The traffic counts, my understanding from the initial EIR, were done prior to Trader Joe's and Copeland's, or now the Joann's going into place, and so those numbers may be very low. And the other piece is the number of vehicles that are projected for the project. There are 128 units, and they say there will be 192 parking spaces, and there will be overflow parking at the plaza, but our concern is that a lot of the traffic, or a lot of the parking may also happen on our North Albany streets. And so I was one of the initial North Albany residents about 10 years ago that brought our traffic and safety concerns to you, and we moved the issue forward to have our streets closed at that point because there was a recognition that commercial traffic has a very negative impact on the quality of life in our neighborhoods. We've got folks still speeding, and it doesn't take a lot of folks speeding. I looked at some of the numbers and they say they're low. Well, it just takes one major accident. And I'm at Cornell, the corner of Cornell and Brighton is where a lot of the speeding and accidents happen. And so that continues. And this cut-through traffic concern is growing as this projected project goes into place, and my North Albany neighbors are talking about other impacts of traffic coming off of San Pablo. El Cerrito has protected their residents. Their residential streets are closed. And it's just very bad planning to have this commercial traffic coming onto our residential streets. And now what we'd like to ask is that Albany take a very aggressive stance in protecting our neighborhood. At this point, we need to make sure that there are some solutions that will keep additional traffic from coming. And so some of the things that Albany recommended way back in 2004 is that the access street near Wells Fargo be looked at as a potential to bring the traffic directly into the project, which will be in the southeast corner of the plaza, because one of the routes is coming off of Fairmont behind the Lucky's and those stores, and it's just not very wide, and it's not accessible, and it's not realistic to expect that people will use that, or they'll go along in front of Trader Joe's. It's very likely they're going to be using our North Albany streets. And so anything that you can do to get involved and make sure that there's a very thoughtful design there, and also anything that you can do to initiate traffic counts before the project starts, and also put some protections in place if down the road we find that the traffic is too much and we want to put this issue of closing the streets back on the table. It's important to put those protections in place. And Ann Cheney did a memo to El Cerrito back in 2004 asking that they study what the impact would be on traffic if the streets were closed, because at that point the projection is that about 15% of the residents would be using Brighton coming into the plaza, which is not a very large number. I don't know how accurate that is, but we need to have that option down the road if the traffic gets to be too much from the project. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker, please.
I'm going to ask you to limit your comments to 3 minutes, and I'm going to set the timer right now. So.
Ellen Hershey, live on Spokane Avenue in North Albany. Here as part of the North Albany Neighborhood Association, echoing Eleanor's concerns about the proposed Creekside development. Want to add, of course, that the recent plan for the development we saw still showed Evelyn Avenue as a major entrance point to the parking garage for the 128 condo development. Want to add the concern that I'm very aware of the traffic generated for Albany Middle School and Cougar Field, the entrance to Cougar Field being right there around the corner from Evelyn. That's also a major pedestrian and bicycle crossing point there on Brighton for the Albany Greenway, and there's a lot of traffic there. So, the impacts of adding a major condo entrance there on Evelyn are of concern to me for safety reasons. One point about what El Cerrito could do, their 2010 study had what I considered a really anemic proposal for improving the usage, increasing usage of that southern roadway along the southern border of the plaza. They could do something, it only says, let's put a stripe down the middle of it, a line down the middle of it. They could actually widen it somewhat just by sacrificing a few parking spaces. They could straighten out the north side of it. Right now it meanders. And they could put the stop sign on the parking aisles coming in and really make it much more of a through street. And then finally, they could have a major entrance exit from their parking garage emptying onto that southern roadway rather than showing a major entrance coming off Evelyn. It's not unneighborly to ask our neighbors to the north to provide adequate infrastructure to support the large new development. And I hope the city will be assertive in advocating for this. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker, please.
Hello, I'm Lisa Schneider. I'm from the 500 block of Stanage, and I echo the comments of my fellow North Albany Neighborhood Association members. The 2010 traffic study predicted on the order of roughly 860 or so daily trips generated by this condo project. And I believe, I'm talking off the top of my head, but the bulk of those, according to the SCIR, were predicted to use Albany streets. And that is even before that Evelyn-facing garage was added. So we have the structural problem here where we have a self-described regional shopping center that relies heavily upon residential streets for access, which is just not the norm for modern shopping centers. We have El Cerrito developing San Pablo. They, I think, just recently closed their EIR comment period for a plan to really greatly increase the housing along San Pablo, which is fine, but what I'm saying is that there is going to be more usage of that whole area, including the shopping center. So this is a structural problem. Traffic may go up one year, may go down one year, but overall, I think this area is becoming more dense. So I really hope that Albany keeps its options open to protect the residential quality of the North Albany neighborhood. The current developer does seem, fairly open to working with Albany. Maybe they're just getting to know the context for this project because they're new to it. They're in a hurry to. The prior developer, from the word go, made a lot of noise about threatening some sort of taking legal action against Albany should it be aggressive about traffic calming measures, including some street closure, saying that if Albany tried to do that after they got their project going, that they would rattle their swords and lawyers, guns, and money and all that. That might have been a lot of noise, but I just want to make sure that Albany does whatever is needed to keep all of its options open to protect not only a residential neighborhood, but a school zone. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. We'll have that as its own separate item, so you can speak to it then. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Jill Scheel. I live at 1500 Albany Terrace. I'm here, my husband was at the last meeting when Waste Management representative was here, and a sign for no parking on Mondays, or two signs actually, I think were voted on to be placed on our little intersection there. And we only had a couple of days leading up to that meeting to talk to neighbors, do our own research and observation. And since the last meeting, we've discovered that there's another solution that is actually more practical and less expensive. We've watched the trucks, well actually my husband pointed out, we've been watching for the past 2 weeks, the trucks, the waste management guy who was here, representative, I guess, described the trucks coming from one direction when in fact they're heading north on Nielsen and taking a right onto Albany Terrace. Well, there's an existing, it's almost 16-foot swath of red curb, some of it freshly painted for the drainage project that went in a few years back. And the trucks have all been making a right-hand turn problem-free when the car across the street from us is moved in front of 1501 Albany Terrace. So we were hoping to propose or get on the, I don't know if it needs to get on the agenda again, or I'd like to request that it does, that we simply reverse the configuration, and you can do with one sign in front of 1501 and no sign on Nielsen due to the red curb already painted. I don't know why they didn't notice that before, but they didn't, I guess, or Waste Management didn't. But we've talked to all of our neighbors. I'm not sure what I would need to present. I have photographs. Neighbors have signed stuff agreeing that that's the best solution. And the reason I'm opposed to the sign in front of our house as well is because we've already got a lot of restrictions right on our corner lot. And we're hoping to avoid having another one if at all possible. The parking is really impacted in our neighborhood, as it is in a lot of Albany neighborhoods with the small streets. But we all talked in the neighborhood and decided that having the spot at 1501 is the regular no parking on Monday signs for Waste Management to make that turn has the least amount of impact on the domino effect with all the cars having to move. When one car moves, everybody has to move. Anyway, I don't know if that made sense, but so I'm hoping we can approach it again and just reverse the configuration if that's appropriate.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Can I ask a question? I saw an email that I think was from you that said you tried to communicate with the Waste Management
Oh, I did.
representative about this, and I'd like to know more about how that conversation.
Sure.
Did you tell him your specific proposal, and did he respond to that specific?
Yes.
proposal?
Well, we actually, I didn't think it was, whatever. I think I sent you about 5 ideas that the residents came up with. One of them was smaller trucks. Another,
No,
there was.
those are things that we talked about at the previous meeting. I'm asking if there was anything new that you've thought of since the previous meeting that you have proposed.
New is
to
what I'm
Waste Management.
proposing.
Well,
Yeah.
smaller trucks was proposed at the previous
No,
meeting.
what I just proposed just now
Okay.
before that is new.
So did you present that to Waste Management yet?
Well, we suggested that we were, but the thing is, see, Waste Management had the route wrong.
We're running into a discussion here, and we shouldn't. This is public
Yeah.
comment, and if we want to continue with this, we should
Yeah.
agendize it. The email was sent with those ideas was sent to Waste Management, and they had an opportunity to respond as well, which actually that's basically the design of the route. So whatever we next month or the month after, we're going to invite Waste Management again.
Yeah. Well, the reason I'm here too is because the route was misrepresented by Waste Management. He said they were going one way. They're actually going another way. They're not going the way that he described it. At least that's what my husband
What
said
you
who was here.
described is exactly what I understood them to say the route was. So it sounds consistent with what you're saying. So I don't know that there was a discrepancy.
But we've actually observed them
again,
turning the corner.
we can discuss that at a future meeting when we actually have it
Okay.
on the agenda.
Okay, so
Thank
you'll
you.
let me know? Okay, thanks.
Yes.
Good evening, Ed Fields, also a resident of the 600 block of Chicanes in Albany. I just wanted to follow up very briefly on Maureen Crowley's comments and the question that Fareed asked. Regardless of whether the situation is initiated by something Caltrans is doing or hasn't yet done, in which case it's not caused by them, a problem exists which is fairly recent. I mean, in the last number of months, that we've really noticed that when the traffic gets backed up on San Pablo Avenue, there's a lot of cut-through traffic on Chicanes. And that's what I think Maureen was trying to bring to your attention. And so I just want to reiterate that problem exists, and we'd like to have some discussion about it at an upcoming meeting, perhaps in conjunction with other plans for Chicanes Avenue. That there's a huge increase in cars and that they're speeding. And so we either need some enforcement or traffic calming or something. So that's really the issue. Thank you.
Good. I just wanted to frame the issue clearly. I appreciate that. Okay. So seeing no other public comments, this brings us to the police report. Do we have any police staff here?
We don't have a police report now.
Okay.
Because of operational procedures, Lieutenant Geisberger and the other assigned officers cannot attend the meeting tonight.
Okay. All right. So we'll wait to hear more from them next time. All right. Then our next item is 6A, which is the evaluation of traffic calming effectiveness and safety concerns of the chicanes at Santa Fe, Ramona and Santa Fe, Pomona.
Thank you. Good evening. This item was put on the agenda because over the years, we've been receiving some complaints about residents and bicyclists concerned about safety features of the chicanes that were installed as a result of the 2000 traffic management plan. These features were installed to slow traffic on Santa Fe Avenue, along with the islands at the intersections mentioned above, which is Ramona and Pomona. I was hoping to actually provide a map of alternative solutions, but we had tonight, but we had a power outage, and that actually restricted my ability to do things. One thing I did is I conducted a traffic survey on Santa Fe Avenue to see how effective the traffic calming chicanes were on reducing speeds, and we found that in that area, in that segment, the 85th percentile speed was 30.6 miles per hour. And according to our policy, that's considered speeding because it's over the 30 mile per hour threshold. So with that, we do have speed humps in front of the school, the Marine Elementary School, and we have those traffic calming features. I'm going to see if I can just go to Google Earth and zoom into that, into the area, but let's see. And as the speed survey has proved, I mean, it has not reduced the speed on the long segment of Santa Fe Avenue. So there are some ideas that I would like to throw here before the commission, after maybe we hear public comment, is that, again, we can reduce the lane width through striping. We can also create some chicanes that are more like striping chicanes and leave the center islands that exist right now. There might be an opportunity for a speed hump if the community desires that. And I don't know, I mean, that's basically in if we decide to remove the chicanes. So that's my presentation tonight. I'm going to see right now if you have questions, and I'm going to try to load the map right now.
Okay, any commissioner questions?
Apologize for walking in late. Was there any data on injuries or accidents that have occurred around on Santa Fe at Pomona and Ramona?
We do have a map that I can, well, let me see. I have a map of injuries, and not many there. It's not a high collision area, but and not recent injuries as well. So let me load the map first, and then I'll respond. I'll see if I can load the collision map as well.
All right. So while that's happening then, if there's anyone from the public who'd like to comment on this item, now would be a good time to do that.
I'm Eric Shoker. I live at 1116 Santa Fe, and I've been there for about 12 years. So I've lived through.
Did you fill out a?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
You've got the paper.
Okay.
And I just wanted to comment that I hadn't noticed any slowdown in traffic, which you've observed empirically. And I've been concerned, especially when my kids were younger, about the fact that it drives the traffic closer to pedestrian crossings. I think also that what it would have been a good idea, or should be a good idea, and in future consideration is constraining the entries from Pomona and Ramona and Key Route, because you have people coming onto Santa Fe who look over their shoulder and speed through the stop signs without stopping. And I think if those were not wide entry points like that, but were narrowed and also made perpendicular to Santa Fe, that would help slow down. Part of the speeding is people coming off around the corner from those streets. So I think some sort of more rigid entry points would be a good idea. Otherwise, maybe even that and a speed bump or something. But I don't know about the general flow of traffic, except that maybe bike lanes would also be helpful in terms of making people more watchful, because there are a lot of people riding in the morning with their kids, taking their kids to the elementary school and so forth. And if that were delineated, it might encourage motorists also to slow down, knowing that they're bicyclists there as well in that way. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's one thing I forgot to mention, that we're going to install it's a bicycle boulevard, so we're going to have the shadow markings on the pavement pretty soon.
Howard McNetty, 1039 Santa Fe Avenue. I'm the lucky recipient of one of the chicanes in front of my house. I didn't know that's what they were called, by the way, a chicane. I love it. It's like some chicanery was involved in putting these things in. I did object before they were installed, and I objected after they were installed. And I was told, no, they're necessary in order to slow down traffic, but I'm just hearing that they actually don't work because the traffic is still going too fast. I know what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to give the appearance of a kind of a funnel for cars, because you've got on one side the island, and on the other side these things sticking out. But the fact is that there's always cars there anyway, so that effectively functions as the restriction on the curb side. And beyond that, I do think they're counterproductive in that they do present a hazard on a number of levels. You can see tire marks on these things, cars that have hit these things. I don't know what became of the cars. I'm sure they got knocked out of alignment, if not worse. I observed one taxi cab that was trying to park in what little remains of a parking spot between this so-called chicane and the driveway, and as he backed up over the thing, he managed to hit high center, and he couldn't get off. His wheels were spinning. I had to bring out some wooden blocks, and I believe I had to bring out a jack before it was over in order to get him off of this thing. And he did sustain a fairly considerable amount of damage to his car, of which I'm sure he wasn't too happy. So I don't think they work. That's demonstrated. I don't think they're necessary in terms of what they're trying to do, and I think they are counterproductive. So There may be other things that, well, for sure, I know speed humps work. I can stand in front of my house and watch cars whiz by, and I stand behind so that I can see if they brake at all. They don't. But every single car will brake when they come to the hump, the speed humps, up near the intersection where the school is. So I know those work, but this doesn't work. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, I'm Peg Healy. I live at 1026 Santa Fe, so I'm on the block with the speed humps, and I'm also at the corner with the buildups. We actually park on Ramona because our lot goes all the way through, and our garage and our driveways are in that back, and that is the neighborhood that we participate in with earthquake drills and so forth. So I know that block would be very happy to have speed bumps. I know they've brought that up years ago. I agree with Howard. There is no question that the traffic is slowed down by those 2 speed bumps on my particular block. That is great. As a person who walks, bicycles, and drives down Santa Fe going south, I would very much appreciate bike lanes. I would very much appreciate no more encroachments of concrete onto the I'm not sure whether they work, but they definitely make it a lot touchier to be a bicyclist. And I would vote against that. Also, while I understand there's a problem with that odd angle that Ramona and Pomona and Key Route all come out on. Yes, I have to crank my head to make sure someone's coming. It's just what you do. But I do remember that when these were first proposed, the people who lived right on the corner on the west side of Ramona were not happy to think that the city might pour an acre of concrete right in front of their house and take away all their parking in order to turn that into a right turn angle. If it's done so that they still have some access to parking, there probably would be a lot. It would not be as much of a problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Diane McNenny. I live at 1039 Santa Fe. We lived there for 40 years. The chicanes are an obstacle, they're a nuisance. They're also a hazard, I've noticed a lot, to bicyclers that have to stop or go out into traffic when they come upon them. So they are definitely a hazard to bicyclists, and I've seen bicyclists that have fallen because cars did not make space for them, so they ran into them. The islands have also been a mixed blessing. The trees are a positive addition, but the U-turns that parents make taking their children to Marin School are numerous every morning and every afternoon. And many screeching out of brakes and unsafe maneuvers that are made because basically of the school traffic that goes and turns around there. Also, one of our cars was totaled that was parked on Santa Fe, and someone it was a drug driver, avoided the island and hit our car instead, and it was totaled. So the islands we've gotten used to, but the chicanes, we just don't. They just haven't been anything positive as far as our living on Santa Fe for 40 years. And 10 years they've been there? 7 years, how long have they been there? I'm asking, does anyone know how long they've been there? Do you know how long they have been there?
Since 2001, I think.
So over 10 years.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I was trying to see what.
They've been unappreciated for 10 years.
Okay. Any more speakers on this item? Okay. Seeing none, back to the commission for discussion.
And we're only talking about the chicanes, we're not addressing the islands, is that correct?
Addressing what? How can, yeah.
Everything.
The traffic calming in general.
I did it, but
As it's listed, it's evaluation of traffic calming effectiveness and safety concerns of the chicanes. But again, they are part of a bigger package, so I don't think you have to be overly constrained.
Okay. Well, it seems like the data shows, the neighbors show that they don't work. So what other options are there? I mean, I think we all think, I don't know that. I think that we need some kind of traffic calming. What are other options?
Well, the other options that I was going to bring is a striping option similar to the ones that we developed for the 800 block of Santa Fe. It's the same. Also, taking into consideration that we're going to implement bicycle sharrows there because it's going to be a bicycle boulevard, so we're trying to calm the street. Another option might be maybe different textures by the, like pavement texture or a crosswalk, a raised crosswalk, something that or a speed hump. There's no crosswalk in that long segment of Santa Fe. At Francis, the crosswalk right next to our house. Oh, that's right. Yeah, but it doesn't cross. But it doesn't cross Santa Fe, does it? Yes. Oh, okay. Well, maybe that's increase make it a raised crosswalk, which actually will function as a speed hump, or we start with striping, test the speeds again. We implement the bicycle sharrows and see if it has calmed the speeds on the segment. That would be starting with striping, and then if that doesn't work, maybe we can implement some more like hardscape solutions.
And by the striping, you mean solid lines to the left of the
solid
cars,
lines next
right?
to the cars, and actually the sharrows.
Right.
Mm-hmm. You want to come back to the through the chair, so the public would like to address the commission.
Yes.
I was just wondering that, I know that some people object to stop signs because they think that creates more noise, but is there any consideration of adding a stop sign in the middle of that stretch? I don't know if...
There are warrants for stop signs. We can actually conduct the counts and see if we meet some of the warrants, but...
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Unlikely to meet the warrants based on side street volumes.
I don't think so.
If we're going to make it a bike boulevard, putting stop signs that then cyclists are going to struggle with whether to obey the stop sign or run it because it seems pointless. Not a great design strategy for a bike boulevard.
No, it's not.
How do you make a bike boulevard when there's not room for one? With parked cars, how would you do it? Take away
That's
the
the whole
parking?
point of a bike boulevard is you don't need any extra width. You put bike lane markings down the center of the lane, bikes share the road with cars. More than Sharrows. The oversized version of Sharrows is Bike Boulevard. Typically, that's something that you want to do on a street that prioritizes bikes over cars. As I recall, when the traffic management plan was done, there was still a bus line that drove down Santa Fe, which is why speed humps were not considered at that time, because you wouldn't want to put those on a bus route.
Mm-hmm.
Since we no longer have AC Transit running buses there.
Another thing that I have to mention is that the volume per day of traffic is about 3,700. And according to the policy, again, the speed humps should not be on streets that are over 3,000. We made an exception
because of the school.
Because of the school.
Right. So.
Well, I was just going to ask you if that would then preclude a raised sidewalk, a raised crosswalk.
That might preclude a raised crosswalk as well. But we can actually change the texture of some crosswalks so to make it more visible, so we can actually have a high visibility crosswalk with different texture.
Right.
Or more striping or some kind of like...
Any comments, Ken?
I'm a cyclist and I take this route, and I haven't found them to be particularly dangerous because there are often parked cars there. In fact, most of the time when I've gone through, but that's just my own personal experience. I would love to see some calming measure on that portion of Santa Fe. If these bump out chicanes aren't working, then by all means, let's find another solution.
Right.
Well, I can actually work on something in next week. Next month, I can suggest some different ideas that we have talked here, And the crosswalk, one thing we have to think about is what is the destination? What is the destination for the crosswalk? And so it's, or...
That part works fine. I mean, at the existing crosswalk, that's fine. If we wanted to put a crosswalk, we'd have to, in a new place, we'd have to meet ADA standards, put in
That's
curb
right.
ramps with truncated domes and all that, up to the now standard. One of the issues that we've got is, of course, the design intent for all this was to squeeze down the lane. It's really a choker more than a chicane scenario here. And we can see we've got a painted center island there to divert cars out. The actual raised concrete island is the obstacle they're supposed to go around. On the west side, of course, there's additional islands. There's no parked cars. What's really missing from this is that on the right-hand side of the picture, as we look at this, the little bulb-out chicane, if you will, is not sticking out any farther than the cars, nor would we necessarily want it to be. I think the whole reason it was put there was probably there are not always necessarily cars there, or there weren't. Maybe there are more as well now. But we don't want to have something that surprises people. So to me, it seems that one of the foremost easy changes would be to add a stripe on the right-hand side, sort of mirroring the striped island on the approach. So if we did a white stripe that went from the edge of parked cars and kind of flared out a little bit to choke down that space and ran parallel to the van that's parked there, that would visually constrain the opening more. You put reflective markers on it. If we have the bike boulevard markings that have bikes down the center of the lane so that they don't ever try to stay to the right, going through there at the same time that a car goes through, then that...
But leave the chicanes there.
Well, if we decide to leave the chicanes, or as a first trial at improving them before we abandon them, is if people are hitting them, other than maybe bad parking maneuvers, they really shouldn't be driving in the parking lane. That's a problem in and of itself. So either they're driving very poorly, or they simply can't see where the parking lane is supposed to be. And so if there were tire marks kind of hitting the edge of that concrete, I would assume that they were shying away from the big island with the trees on it and not recognizing that there's an obstacle there. So paint markings and reflective markers, which minimalistically act as kind of a rumble strip along the edge, would help to reinforce that, to make it work better as was originally intended. So that would kind of finish up the initial design intent, because I would say, looking at that, I see that as kind of a missing element in the design.
My apologies again, but was there a cost associated with removal?
Yes, it is. It is.
Did you have an estimate on that?
I don't. Well, let's see. No, I don't have an estimate right now, but it's $5,000, I could say, according to other things that we've done before.
Unless you were to coordinate it with the next time the street gets paved, then
that's right.
less,
So,
but Sure, go ahead, Howard. We're trying not to have too much of a discussion.
If it's any help, I watched them put it in, and they removed no asphalt. This is just a hunk of concrete just sitting on top of the asphalt. So, you jackhammer it in and haul it away. That's all it is.
We don't need a base repair necessarily then.
By the way, the idea of a raised crosswalk where it's just the two stripes right now, I mean, that sounds like it might work.
Well, I have another question about the bike boulevard with the two speed bumps at Marin, by the school, which seem pretty abrupt to me. Just in my car, does that work with a bike? If we're encouraging people to bike on that street, and then are those real obstacles to biking?
The speed that you're generally going certainly uphill on Santa Fe, I don't find those much of an impediment.
Okay, thank you.
And I haven't found them to be much of an impediment coming downhill as well.
Okay, thank you.
Question?
Yes, I've seen a technology in some other cities that is wonderful for crosswalks. They have it in El Cerrito. I think I've seen it in Berkeley as well, where they have the streak of lights that are activated by the pedestrians. I've actually found that, especially with the speed bumps, that crossing the street, either at Ramona or over at Pomona, where Francis comes in, the cars have a good long look at you, and they're all slowing down, and it's been pretty good, unless, of course, they are trying to turn right onto either Ramona or Pomona, in which case you take your chances. But I would love for the commission to consider that flashing light thing, because it is visible for so far, and that's a really good thing.
Coming up to the
Right in
mic.
front of my house. So I feel obligated to say something, but I have no history. One thing I noticed, you actually changed the image, but where the Chicane is, people have a hard time turning because there's two solid elements in between, and sometimes they don't make it. And I can tell you how they come off, I guess, on Pomona, and they make a U-turn and they turn. And it just seems quite narrow. And so I observe these cars like coming, and I'm thinking that, anyone who park in that zone, could easily get swiped. So it's just happened to be narrow. So we talk about narrowing things so they slow down, but it makes it harder for them to maneuver. So it's just an observation that I have. I'm not sure what the full solution is, in slowing them down, but it does seem like a somewhat of a dangerous kind of intersection because of turns and limits and so forth.
Right, yeah, they were far more open before any of the islands were installed there. There was just some paint markings, and not everyone necessarily followed those. And some of them, frankly, were rather confusing as to where people were supposed to go. But yeah, any layout should take into account the proper turning path so someone can make a decent maneuver. As far as the crosswalk lights, there's two kinds. There's the embedded in the pavement type, and what I've discovered is that they're costly to maintain because they tend to break down, and then you end up having to replace the entire system, which isn't cheap to begin with. The other alternative is flashing lights mounted on a pole. So the sort of a roadside post with what they call rectangular rapid flashing beacons. It's kind of like a small version of a police light bar or emergency vehicle light bar, pedestrian push button activated. And again, since it's kind of at driver's eye level, those are very attention grabbing and actually tend to cause more yielding behavior by motorists, as they should.
We need to meet warrants for their...
We'd have to meet warrants for those, and they're not cheap either. But again, if we're designing it under a traffic calming program, then that's something that could be looked at.
I was also thinking about the advanced stop lines with yield here to pedestrians and arrows. Signage to start with. Maybe we can, if the warrants are met, we can actually program the expense of or the project of the RRB, rapid flashing rectangular, whatever it is.
RRFB.
RRFB.
But as you said, a high visibility crosswalk here instead of just the two parallel lines that practically disappear, especially given how light the pavement coloring's gotten out there.
Yeah.
That would help. Seems like we have a pedestrian crossing sign there. It's not very prominent. Right. Correct. No, we wouldn't want to have the crosswalk at the chicane, but having the yield markings in advance in either direction where the crosswalk is.
And we can do that pretty soon.
Right. Yeah. The paint is a quicker, cheaper thing that we can pursue.
Looking at that crosswalk, it seems to be at a diagonal. Am I looking at it?
It is
correctly?
diagonal, yeah.
Which makes it longer. Is it possible to make it more straight across to shorten the distance to cross?
Yeah, we can do it.
I like the idea of paint, especially because it can be done very quickly. Do you think there would be any behavioral change if 25 miles per hour was painted on every block on the pavement, all the way down that stretch? Because I think people just, it's a long stretch. I think people just insensibly creep up to 30, 32, and they don't even know they're doing it. If that's cheap, let's see if that works.
We can do that.
I would take a look at where the school zone markings are on the pavement, and if we have those, we could supplement it with the 25-mile-an-hour legend. That's something that
Wouldn't
maybe
that
makes
make
more
it
sense.
20 and then 15 near the, because we have 15 near, the speed humps reduce the speed to
Right.
15 miles per hour.
Well, there it's advisory. I think that the other alternative is to, by council action, reduce the speed limit. And that's something that we should consider separately, and that applies within the school zone.
That's, and this might be a school zone within the five,
Yeah.
you know, the 500,
Right,
whatever
so-
the thresholds are.
Yeah, so within the 500 feet of the school zone, council can
20.
reduce the speed limit to 20 or 15.
Can we go back to the chicanes again? What would it take to remove them? I mean, it seems to me that they're an experiment that didn't work as well as we had hoped, that they're not effective. I mean, even by what you're saying, they don't work. They're annoying to people. They just seem so negative to me. Besides striping the street or putting in 25 miles or shortening the crosswalk or whatever, how do we go about taking the chicanes out?
I think we have to go back to council because they were approved by council. I think that's the right way to do it. And with our findings, one thing we can do is implement all of the striping ideas that we have and measure the speeds again. And if that actually doesn't, I mean, it's going up. I don't think it will. I don't think we will get the same results. We will get less. Maybe is convene again, and it's your decision to actually remove the chicanes or not. Is that something that you would like to pursue? Or you want to pursue removal and striping options as we discussed right
I
now?
think some of the striping is to try to not necessarily take advantage of what's there, but sort of complete what's already there. Others are enhancements to the crosswalk, which make perfect sense to me. Again, the striping is something we can do pretty quickly and easily, and if it had to be changed, could also be changed fairly efficiently. The pavement markings for speed as you approach the school zone. It would be good to see a layout plan for some striping improvements that could enhance this and hopefully make it actually achieve its traffic calming goal better in conjunction with the bike boulevard markings.
Now, with the school zone, we have to really create a resolution and process it through council first before we can actually do that on the street. Right now, with the crosswalks, it's
The
sooner, it's
crosswalks
more
we can do right
immediate.
away. Yeah.
But with school zones, since we're pursuing that also for Solano Avenue and Cornell's Elementary, we can include the Santa Fe area neighborhood on Marine.
So you're saying you can do the straightening the crosswalk right away and some of the striping?
And some of the suggestions that Commissioner Javandel gave us for the area near the chicanes.
Near the, on the striping?
On the striping, yeah.
Okay.
Also, the sharrows will be implemented within a year, I think, on Santa Fe Avenue.
Is it Sharrows or is it?
It's not bicycle lanes, it's sharrows. It's going to be a bicycle boulevard.
Boulevard, okay.
I'd like to point out that this picture actually exaggerates, that crosswalk is not actually on a diagonal. It is actually almost completely right angles to the sidewalk. And there is also another sidewalk that should be considered for, crosswalk that should be considered for restriping, and that is the one at the corner of Ramona and Santa Fe. That is heavily used for people going to school because they park on Ramona and then come across and cross there. Thank you.
Certainly the crosswalks have to lead from curb
here's
ramp
the
to curb
crosswalk.
ramp, so we can't
It is,
just move them
slanted,
around
yeah.
that easily. But going with high visibility crosswalks would help. So yeah, it's not a terribly sharp angle. Certainly not completely perpendicular, but yeah.
want to show us the one at Ramona too?
Yeah. The others are straighter. They're slight angle, but not much. So further north would be the other one.
I'm sorry. So maybe I should really zoom it out.
Yeah, you're almost there.
Oh yeah, this is almost straight.
Yeah.
There's two of them there, yeah.
Oh wow, there's
Right.
two here.
So that intersection has both.
And we can actually enhance those crosswalks as well.
Enhanced by the
Exactly.
other-
So all three crosswalks go to high visibility markings.
Okay.
Use edge line tapers on the approaches to the chicanes and the island,
Yeah.
and adding the sharrows to make it a bike boulevard.
The sharrows aren't until, for a year? Is that?
Or sooner. We have a pavement project right now, so I'm gonna see if I can, the problem is that we haven't finalized the design of the ATP.
Okay.
That is gonna be before you here next month. So that's gonna be 95% design, and then we are going to go into actually implementation.
Okay, I have to ask one more question. If we do all these things and we leave the chicanes and things improve, does that mean the chicanes stay indefinitely? I mean, it seems like what the neighbors are saying is that they're a nuisance and they're in the way, and sort of painting around them doesn't solve that part of the problem.
Well, that's why we have this discussion here, and then you have to give us a recommendation. It seems, right now with the data we have, even though, unless another idea could be to mark the edge line tapers along the chicanes, measure again in about a month, and then come back with this. Before we do the other the crosswalk enhancements, because then we will be affecting the outcome.
Then you'd have just one variable.
Yeah, we have only
You
one
would
variable.
Enhance the chicanes to the point that
Right.
maybe they should have been when they were put in 10 years ago,
Yeah.
and see if they're more effective, and then if they're not, then you have the background, you have the backing to remove them.
But how do you know it's not the paint that's effective? Would the paint be just as effective without the chicane, is my question.
Okay, the message right now is that the chicanes were not installed properly in 2001. It would have been better if they actually caused a type of sinusoidal traffic pattern, which they're not causing right now because there's no tapers. So if we implement tapers, then we measure again in about a month, which would be, let's say, July. And then we see how the speeds are affected by these lines. And we go from there. Option one, the speeds are affected. So that means the lines are effective because that's the total system of features is effective right now. Option, the possibility two would be same, 30 point something, maybe 30.4, 30.2, so it's still, we have speeding, so we go, is a decision to make, we remove them or we leave them, but we implement the other traffic calming measures that we have.
Just a brief comment. I don't want to negate what they've said. I have a different opinion about the chicanes. I think that in some cases it's not an optimal design, but I'm quite happy to have cars hit them who are driving recklessly. I really think that's fine. If they're not slowing down and they blow out their tire, I do not care. There was somebody who came and smashed into a tree in the middle of the road and said they did not see it. They were obviously speeding and not paying attention. So I actually would have also been very happy to have one in front of my house. We had parked a car in front of our driveway a few years years ago, somebody sped around the corner from Pomona and totaled our car. If we'd had a chicane on that corner, they would have hit that first and perhaps done so. So I'm not disagreeing with it because they're in a different place on the road, but from where I live, I don't care if people destroy their cars on them if they're speeding. Really.
I just have to put in another request that they be removed. Also, the island and the chicanes have not been maintained. The reflectors have been knocked off of the one in front of our house several times. One time it was reinstalled, but the reflector was going the other way. So that, anyway. And the islands in front of our house are not maintained. There's weeds up to here most of the time around the trees. And that's the only time they have been cleared lately was by Peggy and Carol O'Keefe one time and my husband. The city does not maintain them. So maintaining the obstacles that are in front of our house is also an issue.
All right. Okay. Much more conversational than our usual approach, but I appreciate everyone keeping the comments brief on the follow-ups. But that's how I know we're on the right track, hopefully.
Yeah, I think in the past, another thing that I've heard is that when we didn't have the reflectors, or the reflectors actually were like fell off or something, it was an issue at night for bicyclists. They couldn't see them, but we installed the reflectors, and it seems that we've solved that problem. Oh, sorry.
So we can certainly have multi-directional reflective pavement markers mounted on the curb of any concrete there. That is actually a pretty good design and something that we could do pretty cheaply, I imagine. So that, Ray can take a look and see if there's any missing that ought to be there and just get some installed. So does anyone want to make a specific motion around this? Certainly sounds like the striping is easy, whether or not or when to look at removing the chicanes maybe could be something that we do subsequently, but either way.
I'm not the greatest at the motions, but
Give it a shot.
I'd like to make the motion that we have striping, edgeline striping around the existing chicanes to bring them to their full potential, and then measure within a month and see
After installation.
After installation, to see if it's increased or made them effective for potential. Do we cover the fact that for potential decision to remove them?
Maybe that's something we just address when we get there.
When we get the results.
Because we won't know which way it is at this point.
Okay, so don't put that in. And that we, after the measurement, we endeavor to repaint and straighten with high visibility markings, the crosswalks, 3 crosswalks, correct?
Right.
Along Santa Fe. And explore adding Sharrow markings if it works within the existing ADP.
That we will add the. I don't think that should be on the
in this motion.
In this motion because we will add them. It's already.
It'll happen anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did I cover everything?
Do you want direction from us with regards to considering a 15-mile-an-hour speed limit at the school?
Right. Why don't we? But let's put it on another motion.
Okay.
Can we do that?
I'll make that separate. Certainly.
Second.
Could I ask a question on the motion?
Yeah.
Is your edgeline striping only around the chicanes, or is it the whole?
The chicanes and the islands, correct?
But I thought it was the street.
Right. So it's on the street approaching the chicanes. It's not right at the chicanes, but it's serving the approach to them.
Yeah.
So it's not the length like we are at the 800 block.
No, I mean,
Oh, the edge line on the.
No, not the full length of the block.
Not the full
Okay,
length.
to the, okay.
No. Say for the 100-foot approach to the.
For the 100-foot approach to the
100
chicane.
foot. 100 foot approach to chicanes. Second.
No. Not at all.
No.
It should be outside the parking lane. Okay, do we have a second on the motion?
I'll second it.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? No. And we got Commissioner Chomsky, who's abstained from this because he's too close. All righty. Would anyone like to make a motion with regards to consideration of the school zone for 15-mile-an-hour posting by council resolution? So this, Aleda, just to be clear, the 15-mile-an-hour evaluation is something that's being done for Cornell on Solano. And if we were to make a motion to add consideration of this, of Santa Fe for that?
Well, I would say that maybe we'll do another one
Should we do a
because.
separate item for that?
Yeah.
Okay. So in that case, we can agendize that for our next meeting to discuss specifically
The school zones.
The school zone.
Sounds good.
Okay.
I think that'd be better. Okay. Otherwise,
So that's not a motion, we'll be taking it up and then
we'll
deciding
take it
what
up later
our.
because really
Okay.
that's starting to get a little too far afield from the specifics of these
this.
intersections, and I don't
Okay.
want to do something that's not properly agendized.
Okay.
So, okay, that completes this item. Thank you very much. So our next item is the 6B study session on general plan transportation goals and policies.
Jeff,
Jeff, do you wanna
do the
introduce this one?
introduction?
Good evening, Commissioners. A little over a year ago, our consultant Barry Miller came to make an introductory presentation to you on the work that we're doing on updating the city's general plan. The general plan was last prepared in the early 1990s, approved by the City Council in 1992. So it's time for an update. And I think I'll stall for a second while Barry settles in.
I'm over here.
Sorry. Just let him dive into his presentation. In your packet was kind of a first draft of a series of policies, and that we would take your feedback this evening and eventually craft that into a transportation element portion of the general plan. And it looks like Barry's ready, so I'm just going to turn it right back over to him.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. As Jeff said, I was here about a year ago to talk with you about the transportation element and the overall general plan update. I think when I came to you last time, you had just had a 3-hour agenda item on the Complete Streets proposal for San Pablo Avenue, so it was about 11 o'clock, and I'm not sure how much the message resonated that this is a big deal. So it's the update of the general plan for the City of Albany. It will look out to the year 2035 and examine what kind of community we want to be and how we'll manage our land use, transportation, housing, natural resources to get there. So I have a presentation which really is focused on some draft policies that we're bringing to you this evening. And I will go through this material, the initial material, a little bit quickly so we can get into the good stuff, which is the goal and policy discussion. As Jeff said, this is the general plan is a long-range policy document. It's required of the city. Every city and county in California is required to have a general plan, and the intent is to guide physical growth and development. So this is not the same as a budget plan or a capital improvements plan. This is really fundamentally about land use and growth and transportation. We're looking now to the year 2035. The existing general plan, which some of you may be familiar with, had a horizon year of 2010. It says on the cover 1990 to 2010. So we're now looking at developing the 2015 to 2035 plan. Each element of the plan includes narrative text that provides some context for a topic area and then a series of goals, policies, and action statements on that topic. I included this just to show you that one of the most familiar parts of the general plan is this color-coded land use map. This provides the foundation for the zoning map of the city Each of these different colors corresponds to a different land use and a different density or intensity range. So most of the city is that kind of light yellow color, which is low-density residential, predominantly single-family neighborhoods. You can see varying shades of red and pink on the map corresponding to the commercial corridors, the purple area, the industrial area of the city. So we are updating this map as part of this process. And I do want to emphasize that we're not making major changes to the land use map as part of this general plan update. We are not changing the designation of Golden Gate Fields, for example. We're not looking at modifying the density ranges or the intensity ranges. So in a sense, what we're really doing through this general plan update is taking the existing plan, moving it forward 20 years, but not really making fundamental changes to the land use pattern in Albany. So the existing general plan organization is shown on the left side of this slide. The new general plan organization is shown on the right side. A couple of things I do want to point out. What was the open space, recreation, and conservation chapter, that was a single chapter in the current plan, is being broken into two chapters, one on recreation and open space and another on conservation and sustainability. I would say that split reflects the greater importance of sustainability as a theme of this plan. The section that was called Community Health and Safety, which includes noise and various environmental hazards, is being retitled the Environmental Hazards element. We're adding a Community Services and Facilities element, and we're adding a waterfront element to the general plan, which, again, the intent of that is not to blaze new policies, but rather to summarize the existing policies that the city has adopted over the past decade or so and that other agencies have adopted for the Albany shoreline. The circulation element now will be called the transportation element. The fundamental organization of this element is changing to really reflect an emphasis on multimodal transportation and looking at not just roads, but all ways of travel, all means of mobility in the city. So in terms of developing our policy framework, one of the major steps was an audit of all of the existing planning documents in the city that affect transportation. This is most of the list here, but I think there are some other documents that include transportation policies that we also looked at. Starting with the existing general plan, I mean, there are about 25 policies in the existing plan that were revisited. We looked at the 2000 Traffic Management Plan, the 2012 Active Transportation Plan, the Climate Action Plan, which of course is not just a transportation plan, but has a heavy focus on transportation and how development patterns affect transportation and greenhouse gas emissions. So that was included. The 2013 Complete Streets Policy and the more recent San Pablo Buchanan Complete Streets Plan. There are various parts of the municipal code that look at transportation. And finally, county and regional plans like Plan Bay Area, which was adopted last year, looking kind of at the regional level at how mobility and transportation in the Bay Area is changing and will change in the future. This is what the policy audit looks like for the transportation topic. You see 26 pages of a matrix like this. In the left-hand columns, you see the source document, 92 general plan circulation, the policy reference number, the policy statement, identification of what topic it covers, and then some evaluation of whether it's still a relevant policy, whether it should be edited, advanced, merged with another policy. So these are all policies in existing planning documents. That previous slide, we went through and took every policy statement and put it into a matrix like this. There's about 250 individual rows in this table that basically bring all of the transportation policies in the city together. So on your left on this slide, you see the existing goals from the 1992 general plan, and then on the right, you see the proposed goals. The goal titles are a little bit misleading in both cases because they're really just the titles of, I'll walk through the proposed goals in greater detail so you get a better sense of what each of those topics relates to. But one point I do want to make is that, we thought about doing this transportation plan, organizing it by mode of travel so that you'd have all your road policies, all your bike policies, all your PED policies, but in a way that doesn't really get us to the concept of complete streets. What we're really trying to do is integrate everything and look really more at themes rather than these silos where each travel mode is looked at individually. So we tried something a little bit new here and looked at various themes relating to things like transportation choice, transportation safety, the impacts that transportation has on the environment and so forth. And I'll walk you through this now. So there are 7 goals. The first goal is complete streets, and it is to create and maintain a street network that accommodates all modes of travel, meets the mobility needs of all travelers, and enhances Albany's sense of place. This may look familiar to you because, in a sense, this is the adopted complete streets goal that the City Council adopted in 2013. We took the complete streets policy that was adopted by the council and expressed it as a series of policies in under Goal 1, looking at how we balance all modes of travel on our streets, making sure that traffic plans, that transportation plans are sensitive to the uses adjacent, the homes, the businesses on the streets, looking at how to incorporate the concept of complete streets in city operating procedures, not just for public works, but for planning and police and fire and other departments, making sure that our design standards support mobility and support multiple modes, connecting the city, trying to get over the extent to which streets form barriers or transportation barriers within the city, and the issue of accessibility for persons of all physical capabilities, so seniors, persons with disabilities, and so forth. The second goal is to reduce the consumption of non-renewable resources and the emission of greenhouse gases related to transportation. This is where we try and bring in as much as we could from the Climate Action Plan relating to transportation and also land use. So this is where we look at transit-oriented development, looking at how most of Albany's future growth will be on transit-served corridors. It'll be higher density than what we have seen in the past. Mixing of uses to encourage shorter trips, jobs, housing balance, so that people have an opportunity to live and work in the city, but also looking at things like low-emission vehicles, bike sharing, car sharing, ride sharing, spreading the peak hours, and then including an evaluation of greenhouse gas emissions as part of the development review process, so that when a project comes in, there's some evaluation of what will the emissions look like and how can the project reduce emissions through design and other measures. The third goal is to provide the opportunity to safely and conveniently travel through Albany using a variety of travel modes, including walking, bicycling, and public transportation. This is really where we bring in the Active Transportation Plan of 2012 and many of the policies and actions in that plan that relate specifically to bicycling and pedestrian travel, and also to some extent public transportation, are in this section. So this is where you find policies on bikeway improvements, making maintenance of our sidewalk system, bicycle parking, bicycle programming, and much of this is things like bike to work day, bike rodeos, et cetera, looking at our sidewalk and path system, the Bay Trail, the Albany Greenway, some of the other open space trails in the city, and then a series of policies on improving transit use and transit waiting areas and making transit a more feasible way to get around the city. We also look at coordination between Albany's transportation network and the transportation networks in adjacent cities, so connectivity to other cities. The fourth goal is to improve the safety of all modes of travel, taking particular care to reduce the rate of injury accidents for bicycles and pedestrians. So a number of policies in this section there are a number of source documents for the policies in this section, but really the focus here is on safety of all travel modes. There's a particular focus on bike and ped safety and school safety, so things like crosswalks, safe routes to school, street lighting, public education on bicycle safety and so forth is included in this section. Also enforcement of traffic laws. The fifth goal is to minimize the adverse effects of vehicle traffic on Albany's neighborhoods. And actually much of the policy basis for this chapter is the existing general plan. If you look at the existing general plan, there's not a whole lot on bikes and ped and transit. There's a lot on how to reduce the impacts of traffic on residential streets. So traffic calming, some of the things along the lines of what we were just hearing in the previous agenda item, how to manage cut-through traffic, both at the regional scale, cars that are getting off Interstate 80 and using surface streets, and at the local scale, cars that are cutting through various back routes within the city to get to the freeway from within Albany. How can that be managed effectively? How do we manage our residential arterial streets like Buchanan and Marin that function as major traffic arteries, but also our residential streets with homes, single-family homes along them? The issue of access along Canes and Adams was in the 92 general plan. It is going to be in this plan as well. The whole topic of streetscapes and how we improve our streetscapes to be more attractive, again, more pedestrian and bike friendly. And then management of truck traffic, enforcement of weight limits on city streets, and so forth. The sixth goal is to provide for the safe and efficient flow of vehicle traffic. The active transportation plan was really focused on bicycle and pedestrian traffic, so we really needed to look at the 2000 traffic management plan as a source for most of the policies on vehicle flow. So this is where we establish our hierarchy of arterial, collector, and local streets, where we include policies about monitoring the performance, traffic volumes, intersection volumes, signal timing, pavement maintenance, again, coordination with other cities and with Caltrans really on the roadway system and the movement of vehicles through the city. And then finally, parking. There is a separate goal, which is to balance the need for vehicle parking with the goal of reducing auto dependence and achieving more sustainable development. So this is a pretty different goal from the goal 20 years ago, which was provide enough parking, or that's paraphrasing it, but the thinking about parking is pretty different in a goal that talks about balancing the need for parking with some of the other objectives, including reducing auto dependence. So it's a slightly different take. The policies reflect that. It's really more about how do we manage the parking we have most efficiently, how can we revisit our parking standards, looking at topics like shared parking, mechanical parking, unbundling of parking, in other words, allowing someone to opt out of buying a parking space with their condominium or renting a parking space with their apartment, and then the idea of municipal parking, which is carried forward from the previous circulation element. So we are drawing a little bit from the recent work of the Measure D working group, the group that just reported out last week earlier this week, I think, on some recommendations on parking. So we've incorporated some of those recommendations into the draft that you have. Before I close, I did want to just mention there are other components. This is not just a policy document. There's a narrative that goes with the policies that will talk about existing traffic conditions in the city. We have a traffic consultant working with us that's Fair and Peers. They have a lot of experience working on transportation planning in the city. They've just completed traffic counts on April 30th at a number of intersections and road segments. We are going to be doing traffic projections as part of the general plan update for the year 2035, looking at land use changes within the city and also at the regional level, how will regional traffic affect our local streets, and what physical improvements may be needed to manage the expected increase in volumes. So I'll leave you with these discussion questions, and at this point, I think what we really wanted to do is hear from the Commission about questions on whether these are the right goals, whether there are topics that are missing, whether the policies are providing the right direction, whether there are additional policies and actions that you think may be needed to guide the city forward. I want to add that this is the first time these policies have been unveiled. They're literally 2 days, 3 days old. They will be kicked around for probably the next 9 months before they're brought to the Planning and Zoning Commission and then to the City Council for consideration for adoption as part of the general plan. So there's an opportunity during that time period, both individually and as a commission, and for Albany residents who aren't on the commission to weigh in on the topic. These are available on our project website. at albany2035.org. And we are encouraging folks to comment and give us feedback on these policies and actions. We also have a study session next Wednesday night with the Planning and Zoning Commission on this exact same topic. So they'll spend an hour or so talking about the very thing that you're about to talk about, which is the transportation policies. They're looking forward to hearing what you had to say, and they'll take that into consideration in their conversation as well. And that concludes my presentation. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Any questions for clarification from commission members? I do have one. Looking at the land use map, I certainly see a strip of green along the shoreline that my initial thought was that that's probably the Bay Trail alignment there along the edge of the Golden Gate Fields property, which then led me to ponder what the land use, if any, would be for the Bay Trail along Buchanan from the interchange out to the shoreline, if that ought to just be general undesignated or if that's actually park, or, if it ought to be represented in any particular way.
Mm-hmm. So the extent of the trail that you're referring to would start and end where? Because we can look at possibly creating a green stripe if it's effective to do that.
Right, and that's what I'm not entirely sure about. From the I-80 interchange with Buchanan headed west, that's where our Bay Trail spur runs out to basically to right here, this section. If that's something that should be specifically designated as a different land use, and my guess is park, that might be something that makes sense to show. And I honestly don't know specifically how that's designated, if it's just, part of our regular public right-of-way or not.
We'll look into that. One thing I would add is that the designation for Golden Gate Fields is commercial recreation, so it does still express that it's recreational already, but we'll...
Just the strip of green on their west edge along the shoreline, whether that's where the East Bay Regional Parks is establishing the Bay Trail along that section, maybe not.
It doesn't look like the right shape, especially where the beach.
You're right, it deviates away from the road.
Yeah.
Is that perhaps a BCDC setback or something? Well, I don't know. Anyway, that may be something, if the actions aren't final, that would redesignate that.
One of the particular challenges with the waterfront is we have a measure, what we call Measure C, the voter approved requirement that any substantial changes to the general plan, go back to the voters. The existing general plan does, in its text, talk a lot about the Bay Trail, so we might have to think about how we graphically represent that. To make sure that we have those policies reinforced, but maybe not trigger a Measure C vote or something like that.
No, I'm not proposing to change it. I was just thinking, if it has a designation and we just kind of overlook that in preparing the drawing, it might be worth showing, but beyond that, I have no special stake in it.
I'd add also that there will be a map in the transportation element and possibly in the recreation and open space element that shows the trail system for the city, and that connection would be highlighted on that map also if we don't actually change the land use designation.
Exactly, and I think that'd be more important to me than even this one. Okay, so barring any other questions, well, I wanted to know whether it's something that ought to show or not. A question with a comment, I suppose. So, any public comments or questions?
Hi, Amy Smollins. So is this presentation here available at albany2035.org, what you've got here?
It will be, or we're going to try to put it up tomorrow, actually.
Okay, cool. And are you going to have public sessions to discuss this, or do we just, as the public, just attend meetings of specific bodies? Is that sort of the
What we've been doing on the general plan so far is having the Planning and Zoning Commission act as some sort of the conduit for all public input. And they've been holding meetings every month. It's typically the fourth Wednesday of the month.
Right.
The regular second meeting of the month.
So go to planning and zoning, but also come here if you're going to be discussing it, but for the most part, planning and zoning.
Right, and we'll be going to some of the other city commissions as well. Parks and Rec will have a meeting on this. Sustainability Committee will meet on this as well.
All right, thanks.
All right, thank you.
Carol O'Keefe, Albany resident, and I have kind of a hodgepodge of comments, so I apologize. It's going to be all over the place. First, two of the policies, 1.6 and 3.6, talk about improvements to sidewalks to make it easier for people with accessibility issues or just people who want to walk on them to do that. And then Action 4.B talks about enforcing ordinances prohibiting parking on sidewalks. I would suggest that it certainly is a good idea to make it easier for people to walk on sidewalks, particularly if they have accessibility needs. But it doesn't do any good to have those policies unless we're actually enforcing the ordinances prohibiting parking on the sidewalks. And that does continue, and I guess really the gist of this particular comment that I have here is to ask you all to look particularly at that, I know, somewhat thorny issue. But it really struck me that I don't want us to improve sidewalks so cars can park on them. That's what it boils down to. So that's the first thing. And then the second is the various references to cut-through traffic in policy 5.4 and action 5B, which it certainly, action 5B is talking about evaluating the degree of traffic that is cut through. And that sounds like a really good idea to me, at least in part. Maybe we all get on the same page as to what we mean by cut through and have a discussion about where is it cut through if what you're trying to do is minimize the amount of driving you do by taking the shortest path between 2 points, as opposed to sticking to the very large streets that, add a mile in each direction depending upon where you live. And then there's the third thing that I have never understood, which is how anybody looking at a vehicle traveling, let's say on Washington Street, can tell by looking at that vehicle where it originated and where it's going. I don't know how you know whether it's coming from east of San Pablo or going to 80 or not. So that's one of those, cut through is always one of those things that seem to me, everybody has their own impression of what it means. And it would be helpful to do the evaluation and maybe try to standardize and get straight what's really meant there. And then in policy 5.10, there's the, I thought, somewhat surprising recommendation or policy to discourage sidewalks on the hillside in certain areas. And I couldn't quite visualize it. So this is actually a request for a little more information about that policy to know the exact streets or conditions, whatever it is, that are being discussed here. And let me see. Oh, yes, the last comment I had refers to policy 7.5, which is looking at more imaginative ways to handle parking, and it specifically mentions lifts. And I couldn't help but think of something some of you may have heard, but maybe not all. Susan Moffett, who many of you probably know, she lives in the condo behind the Arco building, came to one of, maybe it was a P&Z meeting, to say her building installed a lift, to optimize the parking. She said, we don't use it. It takes too much time to get the car in and out. People park on the street because you're always in a hurry when you're coming and going. So, I think it's a great idea to find ways to minimize the land that is used for parking. But we have some experience that we can look at with which ones of those options are actually going to be used after they're, put in at great expense. So, like I said, a hodgepodge of things. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So, Back to the commission for comments.
I'd like to follow up on Carol's comment about item number 510, about discouraging hillside sidewalks. I find that in sort of direct opposition to what we've been trying to do on this commission for a couple of years now. It doesn't seem to fit with the rest.
I mean, I can certainly see where hillside sidewalks in many cases are not going to meet ADA slope standards, but does that mean we should not have a sidewalk? I tend to say, well, we'll do the best we can. The sidewalk is a good thing to have because many people ought to be able to use it. I agree.
Right, we've been arguing to make the sidewalks viable. And I could picture a new development on part of the undeveloped land of the hill where maybe sidewalks wouldn't make sense. But that's kind of a special case.
Sure. Just if I can just add, so what you'll notice next to each of these policies is in small font italics, the source. So in that case, I believe that came from the municipal code. So, it's certainly not something that has to be in the general plan. I know it was picked up by the active transportation plan when they did kind of an audit of all the city regulations that deal with transportation. There was a specific reference to that. So that's something we can look at taking out and possibly making a recommendation to change the municipal code if it's appropriate. I mean, the other thing is to just look at the exact wording and see if it's captured correctly in this policy.
Great. Great, thank you.
Well, what's the difference between a sidewalk and a pedestrian walkway?
Well, I would say a pedestrian walkway is not necessarily in the city street right-of-way, that it could go between blocks, possibly.
Like Catherine's Walk, is that?
Yes, that would be an example of a pedestrian walkway.
Thank you.
So it would seem that we can be fully supportive of those kinds of walkways, but say that we also need to have sidewalks along the street for people whose path of travel happens to be parallel to the street.
And I'd amend that to usable sidewalks.
Yes.
While we have the land use map, this is a personal peeve. The UC Village changed their system of streets some years ago, and I'm not sure that's captured here. It's a little hard for me to tell.
It's not. So let me clarify that what you're looking at here is actually the land use map from the existing general plan. The land use map from the new general plan is being developed, and we are using a new base map for that. Terrific. So you'll have the correct street system. You'll also have the correct land use designation for the portion along San Pablo Avenue, which is no longer going to show as public and institutional.
Terrific. I also noticed that in item number 7.6, you talk about car share, and I wonder if there's a place to add a reference to bike sharing. Bike sharing is coming to the East Bay, and hopefully one day will broaden out to Albany.
Well, I've got a couple. In the wording of Goal 2 and Policy 2.7, so sustainable transportation, reduce consumption of non-renewable resources, and emission of greenhouse gases related to transportation. And then again, Policy 2.7 talks about evaluating greenhouse gas emissions, and that's great, yet it completely ignores particulate emissions and other emissions that have negative health and environmental impacts. I would strongly encourage adding those references specifically for particulate emissions and other emissions with negative health and environmental impacts, because that, especially, we can't necessarily control how much truck traffic we're getting on I-80 and so forth, but to the extent that we have any influence over those things, I think it makes a big difference for the health of our community in a very direct fashion, and I don't want it to be forgotten just because we use greenhouse gases as kind of a proxy, because there are cases where maybe the greenhouse gases go down, but the others go up, and we need to take a look at that, and make an informed value decision on them. So adding that would make me much happier. Then 6 and 6.1. It talks about provide safe and efficient flow of vehicle traffic, and do we want that to include bikes as vehicles? In other words, are we meaning motorized and non-motorized vehicles? My inclination is to say yes. And then the road hierarchy talks about maintaining a network of arterial, collector, and local streets. And I don't know that we're quite there yet, but I feel that maybe a statement of establishing a hierarchy of bicycle routes is something that should be explicitly called out here. Maybe Aleda's ahead of me on that one.
Caltrans is moving for the multimodal level of service, and we should really include it in this because they actually have it. And although they are still working on it because they might contradict it to, like pedestrian level of service may affect the bicycle level of service. It's something that it's right now here, and we should really make a consideration of that.
We do have Action 6B, which is to establish multimodal level of service standards. So we're definitely going to be moving in that direction.
Okay. But I really liked the comments that you made about talking about trying to include multimodal everywhere rather than put bikes and pedestrians in separately. And I think that that's where kind of that gave me the idea. Let's reinforce that in some of these statements as well. And I know that I've looked at where bike paths cross streets and tried to treat those as regular intersections. There's historically been sort of a default assumption of, well, yeah, you put a stop sign on the bike path. Like, well, unless the bike path has more traffic volume than the adjacent street, and then we want the stop sign on the street, not the bike path, or yield signs, or whatever the appropriate control is. So I like that direction, and I'm happy to see that. Other thoughts? Harry?
Well, let me follow up on a couple of things Fareed said first. In reference to 2.7, which was about measuring emissions, I definitely support Fareed's comment, but I also wanted to make sure that we don't box ourselves into an interpretation of emissions reduction that makes us inherently anti-development and anti-density. I think there's always a risk when you try to measure emissions that you say, well, if you put in a big project that brings in a lot of people, it will generate more emissions, and the way to solve that is to put in a small project. That doesn't really work. If we put in small projects or no projects, that means that other places with less attention to sustainability than Albany are going to kind of take in that excess of people and needs for services. So I just hope that as we think about reducing emissions, we think about the benefits the project will offer, the people it will serve, and the density, the general benefit to the region that results from density increasing. I don't think there's anything in the policy as stated that works against that. I just want to make sure we keep that in mind. Regarding vehicle and motor vehicle, it is striking and very impressive and encouraging to see how much attention there is to pedestrian and bicycle needs in this document overall. I think we definitely need some attention in the document to the needs of motor vehicles, and I think some of the items in that chapter that was labeled vehicle flow are specific to motor vehicles and should be, and I think if the wording is done carefully, I think it can work, and so that where you need to address the needs of motor vehicles specifically, you say motor vehicle, and where you say vehicle, it's a more general multimodal concept, and I think both of those are important. My other comments are about parking, and I'm really pleased as a new shoepista. I'm really pleased to see that a lot of the ideas from Donald Shoup and his colleagues are reflected here. There were, in item 7, like let's see if I can find the one, balancing, yes, efficient use of available parking. I really like that expression, and balancing supply and demand. Not necessarily to say that the demand is fixed and we have to increase the supply to satisfy it, but rather find ways to make them work together. My only hesitation about this section overall is that in some of the action items, I think it risks being a little bit too much in the way of dictates. And one of Shoup's ideas is that in general, when governments try to manage parking by regulation, it makes things worse and not better. And using a pricing system that kind of automatically adjusts itself to meet the real world conditions is much more flexible and effective. So in 7D, you talk about evaluating Albany's commercial parking requirements. And certainly the Shoup idea is that any kind of parking requirement is more likely to make things worse and not better. Even if you try to make your requirement be very forward-thinking and sustainable, a kind of a market approach will just work better and will end up with a better solution for everybody. So I would hope that evaluating the commercial parking requirements could include possibly reducing the amount of requirements, not just changing what the requirements are. And also relative to best practices around the country, one of Shoup's main theses in the book is that those best practices are entirely arbitrary. And when he followed through with various people to say, where did you get this number from? They say, well, we got it from these people. And then you ask those people where they got it from. There was no legitimate source for any of those policies that any city anywhere was using. So I think we have to be a little skeptical about what are considered best practices. They may be kind of random. In 7F, I certainly like the idea of considering that people in second units might not need cars, and therefore we might not need to increase the parking supply for them. But I don't really think it would work to try to write that into law. I think it would just motivate people to find a loophole to like say, well, it's my brother's car and I'm just borrowing it for the next 5 years or something. And it also, even if somebody was trying to obey it, they might have a lifestyle change and suddenly need to have a car when they didn't need one before, and it would be a shame to make them move. Again, I think a more flexible and market-based approach makes that kind of policy unnecessary. If parking is expensive, then that will influence people's decision about whether to have a car or not, and then those people in second units may be less well-to-do than the homeowners, and they might not be able to afford the cost of having a car, and that can factor into their decision. And finally, in regards to what Carol O'Keefe said about lifts, I think that's a good point, but it is based on the assumption that there is plentiful free street parking. I think where lifts will start to work is when parking becomes very tight, and hard to get, and therefore the price goes up. Either it's hard to find a space because we're not managing it properly, or the price goes up because we are managing it properly. And either way, that's what's going to motivate people to use slightly less convenient parking technologies like lifts. And if that's, if somebody buys a parking space with their house and it uses a lift, they've invested in it and they'll use it because they need it. As long as there's plentiful free street parking, it's true, installing lifts and building parking structures and other expensive kind of infrastructure like that is pointless. So I think it's great to have the infrastructure in mind as a way that we can spend lots of money to create a little bit more parking supply when we really need it, but only after we've used demand management to kind of bring us to the point where we see what's really needed. Thanks.
I actually want to add something, follows up on Harry's point for policy 2.7 in terms of how we evaluate development proposals. And I agree that we probably ought to be accounting for total vehicle miles traveled in the context of land use balance. Because if we put something here that people, maybe drive to, but they drive half a mile or a mile instead of having to drive 5 miles to somewhere else, on balance, that's a regional benefit. And I think we should be sensitive to that because putting the right developments in rather than chase them off is definitely something we want to be very careful.
And I think we have to consider vehicle miles traveled in as large a regional context as we can. If we could consider how our decisions affect vehicle miles traveled in the world, that would be great. That's probably too hard to do, but we could at least consider how they affect vehicle miles traveled in the northern part of the East Bay, or I don't know what region, something wider than just Albany, because if we stick to trying to keep vehicle miles traveled within Albany to a minimum, we're going to make the wrong decisions.
Yeah, there's a very simplistic traffic engineering approach of looking at a new project and saying, oh, it's generating 200 new trips, and as if these trips came from nowhere. They didn't exist before, and now they do. And more nuanced is to recognize some of those trips were going somewhere else, and now they're coming here. And if it's shorter, that's good. So we don't have to explore every nuance of that, but just acknowledging that we account for that in whatever format possible, I think is a good thing to have there so that our policy doesn't become knee-jerk anti-development. Other thoughts?
Yeah, there's a couple that I know that we're doing, and I don't know if we want to say continue or enhance. One being 3.9, where it talks about bike to work day, bicycle rodeos. If there's a way of saying that we're already doing that, and the same with 4.3 to add the word continue in there. And 4.2. And I guess 4.3 is part of what we've heard is coming. Maybe it continues a little too optimistic there, but anyway. 4.2, where it talks about the rights of pedestrians and bicyclists, I'd like to add the word responsibilities. I think bicyclists and pedestrians do have responsibilities in their travel also. 4.7 talks about walkers, runners, and strollers, and I'm not quite clear what the difference between walkers and strollers, but I'd like to have some kind of a wheeled, non-motorized word, and I'm not sure what that word is.
Do you mean like scooters and skateboards? Or?
More wheelchairs or baby strollers or...
I mean, a baby stroller always has a walking person guiding it. So in theory, that should be covered by walkers.
But wheelchairs don't necessarily.
Wheelchairs are different.
Yes. And scooters could fit in there. I hadn't really thought about them.
I think scooters and...
Yeah, I could just... Other non-motorized vehicles.
Sure, that's fine. Just
well, not necessarily a vehicle or modes of travel or something. Mm-hmm.
Well, but a motorized wheelchair wouldn't fit in active transportation.
Why not?
If it's motorized?
Because
it's not active, but it's also not a motor vehicle.
Yeah.
So
I
think the point is that there are a lot of fine distinctions to make here, but we need to cover them. We need a more generic way to talk about it that covers all of this.
Yeah, that would be good.
Multitudinous wheeled contrivances.
5.4 talks about local cut-through traffic. I really don't like the word cut-through. It just, I don't know, the roads are to drive on, and in a way you kind of want to spread it out a little bit, so cut-through just doesn't sound good. And somewhere on here it talks a lot about Washington, and I'm wondering why Washington and not Canes and Adams, or another street. It just focuses on one, and I don't think that's really fair.
There is a whole item on Canes and Adams.
5.11 talks about UC Village. I'm not sure why that's in there, as it's not really under our purview, although what you say is fine.
Maybe instead of provide is encourage. Through working with UC.
I like it in there because it would be nice to be able to cut through. Well, maybe that's not the right word, but that's my commute. And if I could turn, right where the park is, I would cut a huge amount out of my bike commute.
If you could drive through there.
If I could ride through there, it would be wonderful. But I don't feel welcome to do that.
And I guess my final comment is on the 7, on the enforcement. I totally agree with what Harry was saying. I think that, and I don't know if it has to go in here, but somewhere there needs to be funding for enforcement. It's good to talk about all kinds of different ways to do this, but without funding, it's not going to happen. And the same with just capacity to do these things, as far as if we have enough staff, or the staff in the right positions, or how to make it work. It's and I don't know if that has to go in here, but there's great ideas, but how do we do them, both with funding and with people? So I don't know if that has to go in here, but.
Does that apply to parking specifically, or to the entire document?
The entire document, but I think there's a part in here about parking. When it just struck me, it was going to take a lot of enforcement. I think it was 7.2. When you talk about time parking and parking regulations and all of that, it just takes enforcement.
Yeah.
Which isn't to say we can't do it. It needs to be part of the discussion.
I think with paid parking, the enforcement costs much less than the revenue from the paid parking program, so that shouldn't be a problem. With time-limited parking, there's definitely a problem with enforcement.
So I totally agree with the funding comment, but I don't think that should mean we shouldn't have it as goals. But I noticed things throughout this whole thing that I'm like, I don't know how we're not really paying for it now. I don't know how we're going to pay for it in the future, but I like to have it in the goal so that we know that it'd be beneficial to us if we could somehow fund it. Enforcement, maintenance, lighting. We heard earlier today about the landscaping on islands and things like that. I mean, those are all things from Complete Streets, my education, that, the more we can keep things up and make it look good, it will slow everybody down, which is what I like. But also, this is my... I haven't talked that much about this here, but this parking on sidewalks, I think it's such an elephant in the room. I live on Pier Street, and you cannot park on the street without being sideswiped. You can't do it. So what do you do? What do you do? And I don't feel guidance from the city on this. I feel, there's lines that have gone down the middle of the road, and it forces people into the parking. And it forces people to be hit while they're parking. Is the answer that there's no parking? Kind of seems like that. And I don't know how realistic that is. So I know it's on here, I know it's a goal, and I'd love to find the answer to this, but I don't know. I love that complete streets is throughout this a lot. I think we've captured most of it. I have to really focus on that and make sure that I feel like well represented. And then I echo the balance of not just using greenhouse gas emissions, it's the whole picture. But I know that's the words that capture everybody's attention, but I think it is a whole picture. That's about it.
Thanks. I'm going to follow up one more time on cut-through traffic. So Policy 5.4 talks about cut-through traffic, and as I read it more carefully, discourage local cut-through traffic between Albany neighborhoods and the freeway. And I look at our map of Albany, I kind of feel like if you're starting or finishing your trip anywhere in Albany, is it really cut through to get to another part of the city or to the freeway? You know, certainly we'd like to concentrate our traffic on the major roadways. But I know that for the transportation management plan, we looked at cut-through traffic from the freeway going up Marin and literally followed cars that got off the freeway up Marin to see if they kept going through the city or if they stopped somewhere in the city. And I was like, okay, that, you know, defines whether it's cut through. And even then it's, you know, cut through maybe to another city neighborhood somewhere else. But I don't want to be overly aggressive in how we define our cut through. Because then, you know, someone can come to us and say, oh, there's cut-through traffic. The people living 3 blocks down are driving down my street. Like, or you want them to go 6 blocks the other way to find a major street? So I agree with the comments that have been heard here. So there may be some nuance to that.
I guess I'm more, if I may, I'm more worried about the behavior than I am about the destination. So maybe we could find a behavioral term that captured more what we're interested in.
Yeah.
If we start with the assumption that people who live in Albany and have destinations in Albany will be driving slowly and safely through the Albany streets, whereas people who don't have any connection to Albany will just be abusing our streets and speeding through them. Is that?
I don't think you can make that.
No.
I don't think you can make that assumption.
No.
We might like to think
I wish we could.
I do know that you can tell. I mean, you can tell in the morning when everything's backed up. It's like, this is not only people in Albany, and there are certain places where it's worse than others.
I mean, if we have a street, if there's an arterial like San Pablo and it becomes clogged with traffic, at some point people will find it's faster or just less stressful to get off and take a different route, even though their destination is right along San Pablo. And we can discourage that by making the other routes slower and more obstructed.
Or making the arterials work better. But I think
ideally making the arterials work better, but we can't always do that.
But you've hit the key point there. Is I would say we want to discourage cut-through traffic diverting from arterials through neighborhoods.
Right. If there's a good, if people have a good alternative that is on an arterial, that's when we don't want them finding some roundabout alternative off the arterial.
Yeah. It's those trips that inappropriately divert off the arterials, go through the neighborhoods that tend to cause the trouble because, as you say, they're in a hurry. The whole reason they got off the arterial, now they're not going to drive appropriately in the neighborhood.
Well, let me play devil's advocate here for a moment. Yep. And so it sounds like you would prefer not to have people speeding through the neighborhood who otherwise would be on the arterial. What if people choose to go through the neighborhood but drive at a much more reasonable rate?
Well, that's fine, but there again, the question is, why are they driving there? It's because it's more pleasant, they don't like the high speed on the arterial. If they're driving safely, appropriately, I don't personally mind. I mean, traffic volumes don't concern me as much as traffic behavior, but I really picture that the problem stems a lot from what Harry described, as people who are in a hurry and the arterial's just going too slow for them, and that's where the problem starts.
But let's remember that let's think about what the arterials are. They're Marin, which is a 25-mile zone, and San Pablo, which is a commercial zone, so it's definitely going to have more traffic. What else do we consider to be the arterials? Is it Masonic, which is 25, Pierce, which is 25, Santa Fe, I would say, Jackson, Solano. So they're all 25 miles. So
but I think
that's the speed that we want to start with.
Yeah. I think if they're actually moving at 25, then people will stay on them. I think we start to have problems with what we think of as cut through when those streets get so jammed that they're going much like stop and go or less than 10 miles an hour.
I think the policy doesn't necessarily have to identify the exact solution, but it has to characterize what we view as problematic cut through, what may be appropriate cut through. That's not a problem. Because I do think...
So perhaps we want to come up with a different term like speed through.
Yeah.
That's behavioral.
Right.
Right.
Well, could we reverse it and instead of discouraging one cut through, encourage arterial use? There's one who lives on an arterial.
Or discourage aggressive traffic from diverting from arterials and driving through neighborhoods. I'm just kind of picking aggressive as a characteristic, but if that describes the problematic behavior, maybe we want a word like that.
And then you think about some of the things that people have brought to us is the high school or St. Mary's, and these are all side streets, and so everybody thinks the traffic on their street is too much traffic and it goes too fast. So it's difficult to think of how to think about it, because I think everybody thinks that they have too much cut through traffic.
Even the people living on Marin Ave may think that.
Just to summarize, I think I can take the feedback you guys have provided on this particular issue and nuance it into a new policy that gets you where you want to be on that. I don't know that it'll be perfect, but definitely will capture the issue of that you're describing here. I get it.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, so I think we've kind of bounced a few of these around pretty well, and overall, I like the direction of this document and these refinements.
Very
it's even better.
impressive document. I was really pleased reading it.
Okay.
I did want to also add, I think Amy, who came up earlier, that the PowerPoint and the policies are actually already online on the agenda for tonight. Right, yeah. Okay, sure.
The grid, the 26-page grid,
yes.
Did we get a legible copy of that?
If you like, I debated whether I would include it in the packet for tonight, and I thought it's pretty dry reading, so but we'll definitely provide it to you if you like. Yeah.
If it was just online.
Yes,
it
we
would
can
be,
do that. Right.
But a non-blurry version.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So I think that's pretty much all the direction we've got. If that
That's
suffices.
great. Thank you. That was you provided us good feedback. That was excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So that takes us to our next item, which is 6C, the report on Measure D. And this will be a report on the council discussion of the Measure D working group report. You going to lead that, Jeff?
I'm going to do that. Okay. On Monday evening, well, as you know, since last November, Traffic and Safety Commission members and Sustainability Committee and Planning and Zoning have been meeting on a fairly regular basis to discuss parking policies related in particular to Measure D. A matrix was developed over the last series of meetings, and that was presented to the City Council on Monday evening. Representatives of all three committees and commissions spoke, including Peggy representing Traffic and Safety Commission. The direction from the City Council, in summary, was to they were pleased to see the work. I think they particularly liked the and gave direction to continue on with the items that don't require Measure D amendments, and provided some direction to move forward on developing amendments to Measure D for the 2016 ballot. And thus we would be using the environmental review process that we're going through with the general plan as kind of the CEQA analysis that would cover any potential changes to the Measure D that the city is required to do, or might be required to do, depending on the scope. And then there would be full latitude for the City Council to place on the ballot a range of possibilities for amending Measure D. They also spoke of encouraging some education and outreach during the interim period, and they also expressed some gratitude to the working group for the time that you all put in. And Peggy, if you think there's any other highlights that I missed.
I think that's it.
But in all, I think it was a good session, and we will be working. We are starting to work on some of the elements that don't require a Measure D vote. For example, there was some discussion at the working group about amendments to our second unit parking standards. We've actually already brought that to planning and zoning a week or two ago, and that will be going forward. There were a total of, I think it was about 10 or 12 policies that we'll continue to be working on. I think we probably will need to reconvene the working group at some point. We don't have a particular date in mind at this point right now, but I think it was a really productive session to have that. And so as the more substantive milestones come up, we'll probably touch back in with the working group. In the meantime, we'll keep you posted on the individual initiatives that are coming along as we work on these. Be happy to answer any questions.
Comments?
Oh, let's do public comments first.
Public want to comment on this? Okay, I think we've worn them out.
So my question is about the continuing role of the working group, and I just looked at the video. I wasn't able to attend the City Council, but it seemed like they were interested in having the working group's focus be on the education and outreach process rather than on policy development. Is that correct?
I think that's true, although I'm not sure there's a big distinction. We would need your help in developing the policy then to go out and do the education and outreach. So I think you're right in the way they characterized it, but I think it's a little tighter package than.
Okay, because I mean, for me personally, education and outreach, I can talk everybody's ear off if you want, but outreach has to be something more than that, and that's not going to come from my skill set. So I'm trying to figure out if there's a role for continued meetings of the commission that are more kind of wonky, not the commission, but the working group, or if the working group is going to turn into more of a political animal.
Well, I think there is a continued policy role because what's left undone is exactly what the changes to Measure D might be. And but the other part of it is, and I think perhaps part of education outreach is a more political element. that to some degree, in a formal city-sponsored entity, you can do up to a point, and then at a certain point, you as individual citizens need to take over and run a campaign, perhaps, if you want to, you know, somebody's got to do that, and if there's going to be something on a ballot. So we have to find that place. I think it's up to the point, once the council decides, okay, this is on the ballot, that's probably when Lisa's staff will kind of step back, and that becomes more of a citizens.
Now, I'll be even more blunt than that. I mean, city resources should not be used for campaigning. And so the wording, education and outreach, is very well chosen. You can educate people on what the proposal is without entering into advocacy. But anyone who wants to enter into an advocacy role is going to have to step out of the city organized work group or city staff and do it on their own time, own resources. So I fully understand why that wording is there. It has to be that way.
Okay, so would you expect that the working group would be reconvened within the next 3 months or sometime later than that? Or
To be honest, we haven't kind of gotten our head up out of the rush of business for the last few days.
I have some idea of what lies ahead, but if you don't know, that's fine.
Right now, I don't, but for your next meeting, we'll do some brainstorming on how to proceed for that.
For our next meeting of this
of the Traffic and Safety Commission. Yeah, sorry, we've just kind of been just a few days ago.
Very new, so that's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that was information only, so no action needed there. Thank you, Jeff.
Good. Thank you.
So item 7 is our announcements and communications. The report on the bike rodeo on May 17th, this past weekend.
Okay, we actually have a slideshow. I used to be on the arts committee, you know.
What, no video?
No video. That's Karina's job. Okay, as the lady sets it up, I'll just tell you, we did have the bike rodeo. The Albany Police Activities League did our annual bicycle rodeo last Saturday. The police department handed out helmets. Albany Strollers and Rollers were very helpful in fitting the helmets, and they had their world-famous smoothie bike that makes smoothies, I'm sorry.
Well, it's the city's bike.
Okay, it's the city's bike, but...
We made smoothies with it.
You made smoothies. So, Ken, thank you for all your efforts. Preston Jordan was there, I think, all day. There were several other people from Strollers and Rollers that were there. I'm sorry? Tanisha Neal? Thank you, Tanisha, if you're watching. Ken, I thought you had a really good idea about making the smoothies, having the kids sit and use their hands if they weren't big enough to reach the pedals. That was really good. We had Cycles of Change, which did bicycle minor repairs and safety checks. They also ran the confidence course. We had a face painter. We had about 15 different raffle prizes from various merchants, both locally and sort of regionally. We had Pete Brandt, who's actually a world famous BMX stunt rider, was there with his family doing, as you can see, lots of different stunts. Anyway, it was a good event. We'll be back next year. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for all of APAL's efforts in putting on the event.
Sure.
Cool. Okay, a report on Bike to School Day, which is Wednesday, May 7th.
Well, we had our Bike to School Day at the different schools here in Albany, and also the Albany Middle School. I've heard that it was really well attended, and I was hoping that, Ken, did you participate in a marine school? So can you tell us a little bit more? Because I have more like sporadic information from different things, but it was...
Well, we had about 54 bikes.
Cool.
We filled up all of the new racks that the city provided a couple
And
years ago.
that's one other thing I've been observing, that all the racks that we have provided, I mean, at Cornell, Ocean View, and Marine are really well used, so which is really
All the time.
encouraging. Yeah, all the time, not only that day, but I mean, it's all the time.
So, so there were events at the three elementary schools and at the middle school.
Yeah.
And then, as a segue into Bike to Work Day, the high school participated in Bike to Work Day and had an Energizer station.
Oh, okay, great.
As part of that celebration on the Thursday.
So, for the Bike to Work Day, I also, do you have any statistics, Amy? Or you want to share with us? I stopped by there, but I mean, really, I don't have the statistics. I should have called you before.
And pictures, slideshow. Here.
Oh, you want me to?
No, it's okay. Anyway, so yeah, we counted 580 people going through, and we had all sorts of gifts from local and regional merchants, and we had food and drink and coffee and tea and coupons from Boalong, and we had two mechanics that were there. From Rob from Blue Heron was there, and Winston from Berkeley Bikes and Skateboards were there. So they were giving safety checks all day, and we had giveaways, and we had a bunch of people helping out, and it was fabulous. It was pretty chilly, but people hung out for a long time. It was really terrific. We had patch kits to give out, all sorts of stuff. And a couple days before that was the Arts and Green Festival, which, so for that, Albany Strollers and Rollers provided free bicycle valet parking for that again. We had about 80 or 76 bikes and scooters and talked to a lot of people. And Street Level Cycles was there providing free tune-ups again. And so that was very successful. So yeah, good bike month. Thanks, statistics.
Thank you. Okay. So item 8 is just a summary of our future agenda items.
Can I make another announcement on another topic?
We can go to the other
Yeah,
one.
okay.
Oh, you know what? I shut it down.
Oh.
Maybe we can put it here.
Do you still have the tab open that I
I
set up
can
before?
find out. Do you remember the?
It would be under history. It was docs.google.com/something. If you can find it there.
You have it there?
It's a very long string. You won't be able to type it in.
It's a share.
If you can find it in the browser history, that's great. If not, I'll just talk. Okay. Anyway, what I'm announcing is that San Francisco opened a contraflow bike lane, which I think is the first contraflow bike lane in the Bay Area, maybe. It's 2 blocks length of Polk Street between Market and Grove, where the street is one-way southbound, and there's now a bike lane going northbound. And it's something that we've discussed in Albany as possibly a project on Talbot, the northernmost block of Talbot. And what San Francisco's done is actually very different than what we're considering, because they have a multi-lane street there, and they have a physical separation between the southbound car traffic and the northbound bike traffic most of the way. There isn't physical separation the entire length of it, but most of it. But it's at least good to see that the concept of bikes going the opposite direction from cars on the same street is now being explored.
Well, I found a video.
Yeah, that's pretty much what my silly 4 pictures were going to show. No, this is Market Street because the car's going the same direction as the bikes.
Oh, but on Polk, it's like...
Maybe later in the video they'll go on
Once you scrub
Polk Street.
right.
Yeah, if you drag that.
Okay.
On the sidewalk.
It was a public works truck too.
Yeah, it still looks like Market Street. Okay, this looks like Polk. Go back a little bit. Yeah.
Okay.
No?
No?
I'm not sure. This may be where they're making the turn. I don't know. No, I think you have to go forward.
Yeah, it seems to be at the end.
It's more like 3 minutes in, 3.5.
Yep, that's it.
Yes, okay, so they're riding north and the cars are driving south.
But there's a divider.
Yeah,
there's a
most
divide.
of the way there's a physical separation, not everywhere though. Some places it's just 2 double lines at street level separating them. And they have a dedicated bike signal head at one intersection. You may be able to see them zooming by it there. That's true. We're in our Talbot Street
Back in.
experiment.
Look at back in angle.
Oh, the back in. But this is a two-way street now. This isn't contraflow anymore. But you're right, Amy. They have no parking on the bike lane side, and what we were considering on Talbot would have parking and would have cars having to cross the contraflow lane to get between the parking space and their travel. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thanks. All right. On to future agenda items. We're looking at the 900 Polk Street traffic calming for June, Marin Curtis Safe Routes to School project for June, ATP striping and signage also in June.
Maybe we'll have to move, the problem with these two, B and C, are actually moving along together.
Mm-hmm.
And Marine Curtis is slated for construction in the fall. We couldn't actually make it in the summer because it's not, the scheduling issues.
Mm-hmm.
The ATP, we want to implement some of the projects with the 2014 pavement program. So in order to do that, we have to process it in June.
Okay,
So I'm sorry, but it's going to be long, but
that's fine.
right now it's not too long. Is your birthday? Oh, that would be cool.
Oh, I'll try to talk less. That'll speed us up.
No.
Yeah, there we go. Then in July, the 10-minute parking at Cugini's.
Then we're moving that in July because we don't want to put it in, clump everything in June.
Okay. And then to be determined, Canes and Adams bicycle facility concept,
And the police.
police department citation policy.
Yeah. And then there were a couple of items if you want to discuss the waste management again.
Does that really require us to consider it here, or can we facilitate communication between the
We
residents
have
and
already
waste
opened the
management?
communication between the resident and waste management. One thing we can do is that it doesn't seem that waste management, they actually read the comments and everything, and it doesn't seem that they want to, there's no realignment or rerouting of, there is not an option for them. So basically, I don't know if what we're going to discuss. She wants to have more time to discuss with the neighbors, bring the neighbors here, and maybe that's her right, so.
She can bring the neighbors back, but I think that really if waste management has heard their proposal and has, doesn't sound like rerouting is necessary, because from my take of it, I always assumed that the trucks were headed northbound, and that's why we needed that turn. All the tire marks on the curb reflected that pretty clearly to me. The idea of moving the no parking to the far side of the street is a suggestion that the trucks turn as far onto the wrong side of the street as possible and then come back, and that isn't really something I would tend to want to encourage. So unless waste management suddenly says, oh, that's going to work far better for us,
if it makes, when you make a turn with a truck, you're not keeping to the lane, the half of the street. You're using the full width available. And if making more width on the north side enables them to make the turn, if it's equivalent for them to have more length of red zone on the south side or the existing red zone on the south plus a short length on the north, I would have wanted to hear their reaction to that at the meeting when they were here. Right. I don't love the idea of dragging them back in here for another meeting, but
I would tend to leave that at the staff level, and unless we hear the resident at 1501 come in and say, please put the red curb in front of my house, I'm not strongly compelled to think that we ought to then turn around and do that, especially when they're both corner houses with sort of parking on two frontages. I'm slightly less concerned. And I recognize that a lot of parking shortage going on Nielsen. Very dense, but my suggestion is if staff can handle that, I don't really think you need to bring it back to us. You've heard most of our positions on it in the past. If you feel it's necessary, then we can talk about agendizing it, but I would leave it at the staff level if possible.
Sounds good.
I mean, did our direction to staff leave open the possibility of putting a temporary no parking zone someplace else if that's agreeable to all parties?
If it was on the agenda, you
it wasn't. I mean,
but
I think the motion that we made
about extending this discussion beyond whether it's on your agenda.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, let's leave it at the staff level. If you feel that it turns into something where you need us to negotiate, then bring it back. Otherwise, seem optimal for us to handle that. And the question about traffic diverting off of San Pablo, increasing, other than asking Caltrans if they've actually done anything, which it sounds like maybe they haven't, and I wouldn't expect them to have projects not ready yet.
I originally thought that they were talking about the smart corridors that happened about 8 or 10 years ago.
Yeah,
And
that's
it's not working. I don't think the signal synchronization is working at all, and the preemption on Solano Avenue is not, at Solano Avenue is not.
Yeah, the Trailblazer signs aren't activated.
And then
The whole system's not ready. So,
Could we include that when we do the Canes Adams? Just sort of include that as part of the discussion?
The signal synchronization on San Pablo Avenue?
well, our item 8E here is Canes and Adams bicycle facility concept.
So
To the
if there's
extent that impacts traffic calming for those streets, maybe we can talk about it there.
Yeah.
And since it's not an agenda item yet, we could stretch the title a little bit maybe to be more comprehensive.
Canes Adams bicycle facility concept and traffic calming. And I think that that's relevant because we want to make sure that if we make it a bike facility, that it's got the appropriate traffic, which means not too much.
Yeah, and I mean, the ideas that we've discussed for enabling the bike facility already have included suggestions of things like semi-diverters and other kinds of traffic calming techniques. So it seems fully appropriate to open that all up and design a comprehensive, complete streets solution
So two others. One was adding the school zone 15-mile-an-hour evaluation for Santa Fe, which maybe it could be a very simple, short item.
The other thing that we have to bring back is the traffic calming policy, the update.
Right.
And there was another thing. Oh, the school zone for Santa Fe.
Right. So Santa Fe doing the school zone 15-mile-an-hour
Oh, that's right, yeah,
assessment.
in Cornell.
Along with Cornell, which would be on Solano. And then the North Albany neighborhood's concern about the development at the plaza.
I think that's the second time we've heard
Yeah, we heard
something about
from Preston Jordan about that
Yeah.
a couple months ago.
Yeah. So in terms of before and after data, we have the old before data, whether it's something that needs sort of a refresh on the so-called before, which is maybe a interim after.
Yeah, I think in 2008 or 9, when we were, or maybe 7 or 8, I think this project was also going, and we had hired Fair and Pierce to determine, to study the street closure. I think there were some circles, and we can actually I don't recall exactly how
Right.
that study actually ended up, but we
So,
can.
so maybe a refresh on that if you take a look at it, because to some extent we kind of had already resolved this when it was assumed that that project was going to proceed and it went to council, and so I don't know how much we want to redo what's been done before policy-wise, especially if the actions that might be taken are legally motivated or constrained.
Well, I mean,
Does
to
anyone
the
want
extent that it's really the same project that it was before, that might be true. But if it's a new developer and a new plan, and I mean, especially if the new developer or the new
It sounds like it's not. It's just they haven't pulled building permits before. So now they need building permits, and El Cerrito's saying that they may need to update their traffic study. So I mean, I think the project itself hasn't changed since the last iteration, or maybe that's something that can be confirmed by checking with El Cerrito staff.
We've been in touch with them
Okay.
about this, so we should put this on your agenda.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, since I wasn't really around for the last iteration, I feel uninformed, and I'd like to know if
if there's constraints.
Yeah, I mean,
we
are
have
there
that we don't know?
are there
I'd like to know.
are there actions we could take? We could consider taking. What would be the consequences of them?
That's good. We can do that.
Yeah, because there was a range, I mean, from traffic calming on up to street closure. So yeah, an update on that would be great. Thanks, Jeff.
Can we put the Santa Fe Chicanes back on? We were going to look at it in a
Oh,
month,
yeah,
so maybe in July.
I was writing that.
Probably
So the chicanes, but do you want to see the crosswalk and the alternatives, similar to the 800 block of Santa Fe?
I'd bring that back the same time that you do the after study, unless you want to do it in two separate pieces.
Okay, first we do the striping, the
Stripe.
taper by the chicanes, and then bring that back when we, okay.
Right.
Can you clarify the summer schedule for the commission? Is it
Summer schedule?
Yeah. Is there any change?
Yeah, we don't meet in August.
Okay.
We take a break.
What date is our July meeting?
Okay, do you have a
Sorry,
time?
I should be able to find that myself.
Maybe on the 27th or something like that?
Probably will not be here on that week.
July 24th.
24th.
Okay. I'll be missing that one.
26.
I'll be missing that one.
Very possible that I'm missing that one.
Should we then bring the El Cerrito Plaza discussion to July, since both of you in particular, well, you all are interested in that? Would you prefer that we do that in July?
I would prefer that if it's fine with everyone
Well, I'll
else.
miss July, and that either way is fine with me. There'll be more of you. More of you will be here in July, so that's okay as long as it's still timely.
Yeah, I was going to say, we'll do it July unless for some reason we feel like that there's something happening sooner than that, in which case we'll just bring it back to whoever can make it.
I am definitely out of town on the 26th of June.
So we'll be down to
24th, isn't it?
yeah. So June is going to be the 26th, and we will be down to 3 members in June. July will be the 24th, and I'll be away, but the other 4 will be here.
Yeah.
So. Cover it for future items?
So the El Cerrito Plaza discussion is on the 26th of June? No, July. Okay.
July
July
24th.
24th.
Yeah. Unless there's some reason to accelerate that. Good. All right, then we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.